Carlamay, welcome to the Well Informed Podcast. This is a very exciting conversation that we're having. And for those who are listening or watching, who are you?
Who am I? Well, let's see. In a nutshell, so I spent the last 21 years as a Calgary police officer. And before that was in oil and gas. And so it was a major adjustment and change in careers. But I have a psych and sociology background with a minor in music. And so the whole thing of getting to know people and, the reasoning behind certain things, community, all of that has always interested me all throughout.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine. And it seems like in those careers, that's a whole bunch of different lives that you may have lived.
It is. And, when I look at things, oil and gas, I went in because when I got out of school, I was informed I would need to go back and be a teacher if I wanted to work with with the youth. And I really wanted to work with girls because, growing up, I went through a lot of bullying and a lot of stuff that, we see now, and it's even worse within our digital world. And back then, I thought, what I know at that time, how I could help these young girls, just who they were with their identity and self esteem, confidence. But I was informed I had to go back and get a teaching degree. I was not a teacher, and I did not want to be a teacher at that time. So I'm in Calgary, so oil and gas was kind of the next the next best thing.
Yeah, yeah.
So went in there, and when all of a sudden I started looking at, I loved the forensic and criminal side and private investigation, and watching the cop shows back then, and that is kind of the direction that it took me into with policing. And once in policing, man, the world's opened up of the different areas I was able to go into and have different impacts. We go into policing, many of us, it's like with nursing, or we want to help people, right? That's what we want to do. But there's so much more behind just helping people, because we see people at the worst of the worst. They don't call police when they win the lottery, right? It's always the bad. And so getting to know people at their worst, but then getting to see what happens when they heal and start going through some of their traumas and becoming the people that they are supposed to be, was just beautiful to see too.
I could imagine. Absolutely. And your mantra, your slogan, which is "Connection heals what correction can't." That seems like it comes from almost a hard-earned lesson than a slogan. So can you talk about a little bit of some of those situations that maybe kind of prove that idea true to you?
Yes. So I spent 8.5 years as a school resource officer. And here in Calgary, it's been around, I believe, since 1976, the SRO program. And what we do is it's cops in high schools, and we are there. We have an office. We're situated in there. And not all high schools have a police officer on duty, but as many officers as we have, they put into the schools. And it was through that time, I guess it was about 2009, 2010 when I went in, and starting to watch what these kids were going through. And of course, back then, phones aren't what they are now. People were still getting to learn. I think, with MySpace, and I mean, Facebook was
Yeah.
kind of starting to be the big thing, and a lot has changed. When you think back, when I used to talk to the kids about when I first started on the job as a cop, and I would have my paper map. So, you're trying to tell your partner, and you're moving your head with this thing,
Right.
and these kids are looking at you like, well, just Google Map it, like just put it into your phone. So, watching as these kids were going through grade 10, 11, and 12, and how the digital age was starting to move, and how these kids, even when we went to school, they were going through the exact same things now. Stuff hasn't changed in that way. but how they're dealing with it, the resources that there are. Well, and then you bring in social media, the negative side of it that there is. And that's what I really started watching. And it was that connection where many of these kids did not have that connection with their parents, with teachers, with adults in their lives. And instead of being able to go and engage with them and to help and work them through some of these tough choices or decisions, they didn't know where else to go. So the amount of times I had these young adults, and I'll go between kids and young adults, grade 10 to 12, come into my office in tears. And when I asked them about talking to their parents, sometimes they just broke down more in tears because they were afraid to talk about these hard conversations.
Mm.
And once I really started looking into this, I couldn't believe actually how many youth struggle with this, and even adults. There are many teachers out there who are unbelievable and know how to work and deal and, literally take in these kids and as if they were their own. But then there's some, and then we look at parents who do not know how to engage or how to connect with their kids. When you talk about suicide, sex, bullying, social media, self-harm, pregnancy, many of these conversations, if you don't have them with your kids now, they're going to find them online or through their friends. And
Yeah.
it's not going to be the healthy side of things.
Absolutely. There's a lot of really interesting things that you brought up. I mean, the behaviors stay the same, and that's really one of, or they're experiencing the similar same things, and that's one of the things we find, especially on the digital world, is that we're still seeing suicidal ideation. We're still seeing mental health concerns, threat-related behavior. Those things have been around for a while, but now the digital world has kind of made it almost, this is what we say in our sessions, that it's actually good news for us, because
Mm-hmm.
what that means is that it actually allows us to intervene a little bit earlier and see those cries for help earlier as well. But you also brought up a really good point about the parents. That, how do they have these conversations? Because with a lot of our parents not necessarily growing up with technology, sometimes there's kind of a gap in understanding or even being able to relate to some of the issues. But there's a really good point, is that the issues still existed. They're just kind of, there's a new face to it. And the maps thing is hilarious, because I remember also trying to navigate through the map, but really the challenge wasn't using the map. The challenge was actually refolding the map back up.
Oh, into its perfect, like,
Yeah.
rectangle. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's the true challenge.
I think we would just crumple it up and stick it in the glove box is what we.
Yes, exactly. Until you buy a new one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, so there's lots of really interesting things, with the digital side that have really come to the forefront. So when you talk to parents, and you obviously have a number of different workshops and consulting services for parents who may be struggling with having a conversation with some of their youth. What are some of the kind of common things that you see with parents when you have these conversations?
Well, can I first bring up? So I ended up writing a book. So
Yeah.
Youth Truth, and it's Youth Truth, engaging in conversations that can change lives. And through all of the talks with the kids, because it was the teens actually were the ones that asked if they could be a part of this, because many of them, what they went through and how they came out the other side. You talk about resilience, and you talk about watching them become these amazing human beings that maybe a few months ago, a year ago, did not even think they could ever become. Even walking across the stage, getting a diploma, where that was not where they were a year ago. So that was really, really huge. And so writing this book, I was able to put these stories in and then give tools, because I believe I'm a parent of a just about 17-year-old, and we don't need self-help books. We've got enough. And why are we telling ourselves that we're not good enough and don't know how to do this with these self-help books? We need tools. We need to put these tools in our toolbox. And so when certain situations come up, we can grab different things and try them. And so a lot of the different tools that I continue to talk to parents about, active listening. What does that look like as a parent, or even an adult, a coach? any kind of advocate for youth, we have our own biases. We have our own ways of doing stuff. We know what works and what doesn't because we've had to go through it. However, our teens are coming and our youth are coming to us, and they're wanting to tell us about this issue. And if all of a sudden, as a parent, we know exactly what we want to tell them and what they're doing wrong, and so we literally shut off listening to them. So we have heard what their problem is, or maybe a little bit, but instead of actually listening right to the end, we have no clue what else was said because we are so eager to tell them, well, you shouldn't be doing this. This is how I did it and this worked. Well, how come you're even thinking about that? That's just dumb. All of this stuff. And instead, maybe asking your child, you know what you're about to tell me, would you like some advice, or do you just want me to listen? Because how many times do we know once they say, well, please just listen, and then at the end, they're like, well, what would you do? Or what should I do with this? They're still going to want our advice. But now they have felt seen, valued, and heard. So active listening is a big one. Safe space. Safe spaces are very different for all kids, as we all know. I had a mom contact me. She had a 15-year-old. She'd never been able to have a meaningful connection, engagement conversation with him. He was a gamer. He would eat as fast as he could, start clicking his fingers on the table so everybody could hurry, and he would just go downstairs again. And she didn't know what was going on in school because it was kind of this, how's your day? Fine. What'd you learn? Nothing kind of talk. And so I asked her, I said, what about taking that time and going downstairs and asking him to show you how to game? And she rolled her eyes as we were talking. And it's funny how even when you're talking on a phone, you can hear a rolling of the eyes.
Sure. Yeah.
And so she's like, you know what? I hate gaming, but okay. I'm at my wit's end because I don't even know what's going on with my kid.
Right.
And she went downstairs and asked him. And she said he looked at her like deer in the headlights and was like, you hate gaming. Like, you get mad at me for doing this all the time. And she said, all I want to do is spend time with you and connect with you. So he gave her, I called it a joystick, but that ages me. So a controller.
Yeah.
And just started, being shown what to do. And of course, she died pretty quickly. But she said they played for about 10 to 15 minutes. And there was no communication between the two of them. But, she left, went upstairs. And I get this message from her 2 weeks later. And she said, I literally had to hold on to the island in the kitchen because my son comes up the stairs, looks around the kitchen to make sure nobody's there, and then asks if he can talk to me. And she said he has never done that. And he said to her that he felt valued because she came down to actually just be with him and spend some time. And he said, Mom, you actually saw me. And so now for them, it's a regular thing. He got some games that she can have fun with him. It's not going to die really quickly. But now they've actually made it something for the two of them to be able to do. And she says now they talk, like even while they're gaming or
Sure. Yeah.
they'll talk. But it took something like that coming into his space to just be able to kind of connect and engage with him.
Yeah, no, I think that's really powerful. And, a lot of the times when we especially incorporate the digital world into some of these struggles, a lot of the time that knee-jerk reaction from whether it's parents, it's staff members, it's other people, it's how do I get them off of that? How do I get them to stop that?
Yeah.
And a lot of the times those conversations don't necessarily need to start there. They should, start with why. The why are they engaging with that platform or that game? What about it is driving them towards, spending all that time there, and what do they see from that? And, from that understanding of, there are connections potentially made online. There's also lots of risks associated with that too, that we continuously see. But the important thing, is exactly that. It's having those conversations, or at least starting that connection, kind of getting into their world, getting a little bit uncomfortable with some of these things, getting comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Well, and it's been interesting, just some of the emails that I've received from people that have read the book, parents, where I've had two gentlemen actually who have reached out stating that one of them said he actually had to put the book down because it triggered so much inside of him of stuff that he thought he had dealt with and had worked through. And now that his kids, he's like, my kids are going through the exact same thing. And he said, how am I supposed to connect and engage with my kids if I actually haven't dealt and worked through some of the stuff that I was going through and bothered me in
Right.
school? Because again, things haven't changed, right? Things haven't changed at all. It's just now stuff is now coming to the forefront. I mean, if you take even sex trafficking, when we were going to school, they would come to the food courts in the mall. And, it was those kind of sleazy guys that would be, hey, you're really pretty. Do you want a model?
Mhm.
I'm a photographer. That's exactly what they would use. But now it's a way easier done digitally or by using, other females to friend these young girls and bring them in, right? So
Yeah.
it's not like it's new. It just the ways have changed.
Yeah. And sometimes, what I know what we've seen has changed has unfortunately been artificial intelligence and making a lot of these things
Mm,
unfortunately easier.
yeah,
Because we do see now, not necessarily for the human trafficking side of things, but in the realm of sextortion right now, unfortunately, it is quite easy to manipulate an image into an intimate image without having too much barriers.
yeah,
So right now, a lot of our victims don't even need to send a intimate image for them to be extorted now, and that's the scary thing that we're seeing right now.
yeah. Well, and then that just leads to everything else, right? I mean, and these young teens, they're afraid to say anything. They're afraid to connect. And so, if you look back, and it just goes back, if you have that connection and engagement with your kids, wow, if you can kind of be in a situation like that and your kids can come forward and say, mom and dad, this is what's happening right now. But you've already built that foundation and that connection. And that's so important.
Yeah, it really is, and I think that's why I was really tired or attracted to kind of the website that you had and the messaging that you had, because it's something we talk about all the time. Is that we get calls at our at Safer Schools Together for what is the best anti-bullying policy, what's the best program or detection method that's out there, and when we look at that school system wide approach, there's no one solution that's out there. You go to all these different conferences and talk to people, and everybody's got the one solution to safety. They've got the one thing that's out there, but
Yeah.
nothing is going to work unless you aren't looking at first what's your schools, your classrooms, what's the culture and climate like? Is
Yeah.
it one that's open and supportive of these conversations? Is it one that allows information flowing top down, back and forth, right? Where it's not a closed system where it's only, this is the person who's making all those decisions. And the great news is that, when we talk to schools, those are all things that we can do for free to build up our school's culture and climate. And again, the same thing with, some of these strategies, right? These are just, they're conversations, they're building connections. And the school resource officer aspect of that is such an important piece that we feel, because a lot of the times there is a lot of back and forth of SRO programs not being implemented or even removed from
Yeah.
schools. And obviously we know that there is and there should be a spot and a space for law enforcement in those schools who've had that right training, because we've seen it firsthand where if, let's say, SROs are removed, that doesn't necessarily stop any of the police side interventions that's going to be needed. And now that officer who's called to that school doesn't have those connections with those kids, and they miss some of those things out there. So again, that's why we admire and respect the SRO role, because that is what it's there to do, is build those connections, kind of be almost that little bit of the barrier between the actual, the admin themselves and building those connections.
Well, and sometimes even being a parent, like the amount of times where, because at that time my son was younger, and all of a sudden I kind of felt like I was, the parent, and I was sitting across from some of these kids, and I had a few kids say, oh, you know what, my mom said that to me. I'm like, okay, well, maybe you should listen to her because I'm saying it now. But you don't say that, but
Yeah.
it's funny how then they kind of all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, my parents have said that, or, that's been something that's been taught to me, or something of that sort. And I think too, as an SRO, um, the kids get to see us as a human being. We're not just a cop in uniform. We are, I mean, we're husbands, wives, we're parents. There's so much more to us. And that was always interesting when the kids would come in and I have pictures of my son and they're like, oh, you're a mom. Yeah, you know what? I am. The
Hmm.
uniform is just my job. And it's building, like you said, it's building that connection and relationships with the kids. So, and especially when we look at the immigration that's come in, many people coming from uh, different places, the relationship with police is so corrupt and so negative. So if we can build that positive look to police of who we are, what we do, and that you can actually trust us, that is so huge, especially from that side.
Yeah, absolutely. It truly is. And the times that you spent in schools, and even leaving that as well, and of course starting what you have now and writing the book, you talk openly about obviously navigating a very male dominated field. And I'm just curious, what did you learn about things like leadership and identity and kind of standing your ground in these environments that may not understand?
Funny because that's actually been a big one because going from oil and gas, which
Yeah.
male dominated, right, and then into policing. At the beginning, I felt I had to earn my place. Going through recruit class, I had never touched a gun, had never been into a fight. So going through and learning what that meant and what all that was. I mean, I remember counting 72 bruises one day on my body after we had multiple assailant fighting in recruit training. And it's funny because right away we go into kind of what we know. For instance, when we used to fight, it was like, well, for us girls, it was like, well, just kick them in the crotch and it would get them down, right? Well,
Right.
that doesn't work when you're in that world, the other world. But you go back, you revert back into what you know. And we had a number of hockey players that were in recruit class, and jujitsu and MMA kind of fighters. And we get taught a certain way, but when you are in the adrenaline's going and you are in a life or death situation, you revert back to what you know and what you can remember. Right. So it was very interesting going through that training because I didn't know fighting. I had
Right.
never done that.
Hmm.
So I learned along the way, but I did. I had to earn my stripes, as we would put it. But when I look back, I don't think I would have changed anything because I loved my job. I was still girly girl. I still had the nails, the nail polish, hair and makeup was done because that was important to me. Um, you're you're treated differently. Yep, we were. But and the ladies still are on the job. I don't know when that will change or if it will change. I think as we look with culture, I think there has to be a big change and a big shift with culture. However, as women coming through, we've been able to really prove ourselves and show, even as leaders, um, who we are and what we can do. The one thing I really believe, though, you don't have to have stripes and all this stuff to be a leader. You can be a constable and or a worker in an organization, um, just an employee, and still be a leader. And I think that's so important for everybody to know, because even in the schools, you don't have to be part of administration to be a leader. As a teacher or an aide, or even as a student in your class, you can all be leaders. And that's really, really important to really come up. So just now looking back as, leadership, we always see what things we're missing or maybe what things that we would do or wouldn't do. And so I ended up designing and creating, it's called the calm leadership method. And so, again, no matter what kind of leader you are, we all need connection. We all need awareness. We all need the language and measured response. So again, it's going through knowing your audience, knowing the trust, because that's something hugely that anchors. You know, realizing language can either escalate or anchor a person. And then with the measured response, like reacting is really easy to do. We can all do
Hmm.
it without even thinking, but responding is leadership. So that
Yeah.
kind of came out of with the book and just the different keynotes now that I do, just looking back through all of the time with leadership.
Yeah, no, that's huge. And then, my kind of next question was, what were some of the things that kind of led up to the inspiration to write this book? And it seems like it is a culmination of basically all of those experiences that you've had and working with, some of those at-risk youth. And I was able to look at a few kind of excerpts and pages from that, and it's the real stories, right? The ones that
Yes.
are truly the ones that our youth have experienced. So what was kind of the process like going through and deciding to create and write this book, Youth Truth, and what were kind of the criteria that you wanted for some of the real challenges and stories to go in there?
When I started, so I thought about this, kind of came on my heart in about 2015, 2016. So I started out a chapter. I had an idea. I wanted stories because everybody loves, I mean, that's the first thing that people ask. Well, have you ever pulled your gun out? Have you ever used it? They want stories and real life ones. So I started writing the first chapter, and then, of course, life gets busy and gets going, and it kind of got put to the back burner. Then in about 21, 20, I guess, no, 22, 23, I'm like, this is something that, again, I really feel is needed. And it just kept being on my heart that this parents really need something like this out there. They need to know what's going on with their kids. They need to know just some tools, because everybody's gone through stuff like this. I mean, whether you're an aunt, an uncle, a parent, a coach, you're dealing with all of this stuff, and maybe you dealt with it yourself growing up. So at that point, I had a book coach, and I had these stories because the youth, from years and years ago, when I had said I'd wanted to write a book, they were like right away, can we be a part of it? So I contacted them, and we just started kind of getting stuff together. And they wrote me what they remembered from their stories, and then I put in my part of, and it's funny. We think we can't remember stuff, but man alive, when all of a sudden these come back, it's like you were there, right there at that moment. You
Right.
felt the pain, the tears, the goosebumps, everything. So that's kind of how that went. And working with my book coach, it was January of 2024. And I said, I'd love to have this out for September or like the fall, because I had spoken the year before at Teachers Convention, or I guess the past couple of years, and I just wanted this out. And she's like, well, we need the full manuscript by the beginning of June. And this was like middle of January. So I'm like,
Ah,
okay. So here we went, and we did it.
yeah, that's no small feat there.
It's a lot of work. People, I've had many people, oh, I've got all the stuff. I'm so ready to write, and I'm just going to sit down and do it. I'm like, you know what? Kudos to you, because there were days I sat and I stared at a blank computer screen because I
I
knew what I
could,
wanted to do,
yeah.
but trying to get stuff flowing. Yeah.
Yeah, I could only imagine because, we've got the stories to tell, but how do we make it in a way that is going to be engaging and people are really going to pick up on it and understand and know that these are the tools that we want you to walk away from. And,
Yeah.
one of those ones, obviously you mentioned, is the big one, obviously the connections, but getting, youth uh, kind of on the same page as well, getting on the same page as them rather. But, there's obviously lots of other kind of tools that are out there. And I guess when you are teaching people to stay kind of grounded under pressure, what do you think stops, whether it's adults, parents, teachers, leaders, from having those conversations they need to have?
The big thing is fear. I think, and now in today's world, we look at, are we going to offend somebody? I think that's a big, big one. And when it comes to life and death, and this is one thing I learned on the job, is that sometimes we have to ask for apology later, or apologize or ask for forgiveness later, because when I look at with suicide, I mean, it's a hard topic to talk about still, and there's so much out there and so many resources. But you talk to a parent and you ask them, have you talked to your kids about it? Oh, well, I don't want to bring it up because then they might start thinking about it. And then to be able to say to the parent, you know what? If they have thought about it, they've thought about how to do it, when they're going to do it. They've already got some of them letters, emails ready to send, Facebook, the content, all that kind of stuff. I said, so they're already way ahead of you. So why not ask them, do you want to hurt yourself? Have you thought about it? Because at that moment, you could change that whole trajectory of their life, because now they are seen and valued and heard. And for them just to be seen might be all that they have been wanting to, somebody to see them. And this might be that time.
Yeah.
So, even with sex, right? People think, oh, well, then if we put it in their minds, I'm thinking, how many, what? The stuff we watch on TV now, half that stuff you're thinking when we were growing up, that would have never been on TV.
Right. Yeah.
But it's all out there.
Yeah, and and even half the time it's content that's served to you that you're not even searching for.
Yeah.
Right. And that plays a lot in the algorithms. And it's a really good, important part to be able to interrupt or intervene that pathway with that real connection. Because a lot of times what we find, obviously, when we're working with youth or with schools, and obviously our main focus is the digital side, and whether it is suicidal ideation or even radicalization, which is actually a huge thing that we're seeing right now, boys and girls alike. There are groups and communities out there, and this is what I say in our sessions, is that no matter what way you're feeling, whether you are feeling isolated, rejected, scared, hurt, angry, you are going to find a community out there in the digital world that is going to validate those feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to give you tools and strategies to deal with those tools and or with those feelings. And those tools and strategies won't necessarily be healthy, because you've got individuals who feel that exact same way. They'll tell you it's not your fault that you're this way. It's these people's fault. They did this to you. They give you further justification. And that's unfortunately where we see a lot of individuals who are being exploited, or even those cries for help, those concerns being exploited by some of these bad actors online that will take advantage of those cries for help that they're sharing in those quote unquote safe spaces in their communities. But we know the digital world and who's behind that actual username and that message. It's unfortunate because, for example, some of the concerning groups out there are related to self-harm and eating disorders.
Yes.
And there are groups, individuals on X, formerly Twitter. They still use those same Twitter-related hashtags. But when they share those images of the self-harm behavior, or, how little calories they ate that day, the whole point of social media is you share your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And when you get that engagement of likes, of comments, of reposts, of direct messages, that's hitting that dopamine rush in your brain. And you think for a youth, that's going to get them to say, oh, I should probably stop this. No, they're going to continue and further engage in those groups and platforms. And that's where we also find sometimes with the adults or with the parents, staff members, things like that, it's the lack of awareness. It's just they're online, but I don't know what they're doing or what they're actually engaging with, because there is a level of secrecy that they may have too.
Yeah. Well, and they're being told to be secret. Don't tell your parents this. Don't, it's okay. You've got me as kind of your go-to.
Yeah.
And you bring up a good point there too. So one of the things, and looking now, especially having a teen, parents, we need to parent. Our kids do not need friends. They've got enough friends, and they've got, ample acquaintances, I guess we can say, on social media. But we need to parent. And that is one thing that I've been watching over the last number of years, where it's like the parents are afraid to offend their kids. And the parents are afraid that if they don't, give in or whatever it is, I've heard from immigrant parents that, they've been told by their kids or by other immigrant families, social services is going to come and take your kids if you don't, and you'll be deported if you don't listen and do what your kids want.
Right.
So as parents, how are we supposed to parent then if all of a sudden you have that fear? So that's a number one thing. Know the passwords on your kids' phones. And if your kids are not going to give them, you're the ones paying for the phone. It
Yeah.
is your phone. You can go and get all the text messages, all the messaging, everything from your provider. It is there. But you need to know, and you need to, on the different platforms, say, yeah, if you're going to go on that platform, okay, but I am one of your friends. Like you have to follow me and I can follow you
Mm-hmm.
on the platforms. Yes, some kids will go into other names and whatever, and I get that. But again, that's where that connection and engagement with your kids
Yeah.
and the non-judgment and the not getting angry really quickly and all that kind of stuff comes into play. But that is so important. Passwords. Again, if they're not going to give them, then say, you know what? Okay, then you can't give me a password. I can't give you a phone. But do checks throughout the week. You can go and check history. You can go, even if they erase it, there's ways around all this stuff. Get programs on those kids' phones so that at least you've got something, so that there is a barrier of some type. I know not all of them are perfect. I get that. But it's something on there. But there are things out there that as parents you can do, and you need to parent. I
Yeah.
had the amount of times I would have parents come into the office in tears because they would try to take the phone away from their kids. And the kids, I had two parents where the kids actually broke down the master bedroom door because they had locked it inside their bedroom. And now you talk about an addiction,
Yeah.
you know, we've got issues with our kids and technology, and we are not helping them along. So the parents would bring the phones. I would have a sign off waiver with the parents saying, you give me permission to hold the phone, and I would keep it locked up in my office because that kid, it was not safe at home.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
this is supposed to be a safe place for everybody, is your home.
Yeah.
So,
Mm-hmm.
we're seeing that. We're seeing huge addictions with, even with selfies. There's some kind of now selfie addiction as well, where that's all people do. And
And it goes back to the things that we just can't relate to, because
yep.
like if you walked into a house and all the photos in this person's house, like the printed photos were just photos of them, you'd walk in and be like, this person's a psychopath. But that's not the norm now. The norm is that they have hundreds and hundreds of photos of themselves on their own
Yep.
device, and they pick the best one that's out there, and that's the norm.
Yep. The best filtered and all this kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's tough when you talk about, obviously, these the extreme cases of the digital addiction and the phone addiction, and having those conversations, the parental monitoring softwares, and there's tons out there that exist, and these conversations get harder and harder to have the older and older, like the more time that youth have had this basically uninterrupted time on their own devices. And we're when we have our parent sessions, we say that these conversations need to happen younger and younger, because of, unfortunately, exposure to these digital technologies earlier and earlier, which is, I mean, for me personally, it's terrifying.
It's terrible. Well,
And I can only imagine for youth and kids who are getting these devices, and for the parents to now have to almost backtrack and almost reset, and not knowing some of these tools to have.
It's true. And when you think about it, as soon as your kid is given a phone, that should be kind of the, okay, here's how it's going to be used, and here's my expectations with you as now using this phone. And if you can abide by these rules, and I've had even parents do a signing contract with their kids,
Yep.
right? You know your kid, and you know what your kid, maybe they've got an addictive behavior, or maybe there's other things that are going on. You have and you're aware of what your kid can and cannot do. So if it needs to be assigned, kind of little confidence thing between the contract between the two of you, then do that. And if they are not able to keep with the contract, go to Best Buy and grab the good old flip phone, because they are there. You get a SIM card, you can buy minutes, and you know what? It'll take them forever to go and B,
Yeah.
to start texting. But there are ways around that they can still have a phone, but the data is not there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah, we've also seen it where, parents will have the internet profiles on their internet accounts to tag to a specific device, and a certain time the internet gets shut off on that particular device. There's plenty of different things that exist out there, and again, to your point, this all goes back to, can you establish those connections? Because as soon as anything gets introduced that's new, the youth are probably going to feel that more as combative.
yes. Yep, it's true. It's true. And then it's also like, well, you don't trust me. Why aren't you? And again, it's then we have to kind of, like you said, backtrack. And it's like, it's nothing to do with trust. We know what's out there. And, I look at myself, I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. Well, and so have you guys with doing what you do. You know the worst of the worst that is on
Yeah.
there. And I want to protect my child. They're only innocent for so long. And we need to keep protecting that innocence, because the world is taking them more and more at younger ages.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and when we have obviously these conversations, as I'm sure you do as well, that the point is not as a punitive measure. It's not as anything like that. It's just, this is how we try to keep safe, right? This is the trust that we have to build. And,
Yep.
it's not to say that these tools, these programs, or whatever, these softwares that are on there are going to be on here forever, right? It's just, these are what we need. And the earlier those conversations can happen, hopefully the more effective they can be, because youth are very smart. They're way smarter than us for digital things. They know the workarounds, they know the blocks or how to unblock the blocks. And we see this frequently, especially in schools, where there are like social media filters or bans, things like that. And it's a very quick, well, let me just download this VPN, let me use my cell phone data, right? And those things quickly, are a moot point now. So, yeah, the thing is that our youth are going to be way smarter than us for getting around those things, but ultimately that still goes back to that trust and connection.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And, even some of the apps that are out there, I remember I was doing a case where it was child porn, and there was a 17-year-old who had supposedly downloaded a whole bunch of photos that he had gotten from different girls in the schools. And, we're going through the phone, couldn't find them. Well, somebody mentioned to me, well, and it was a student, there's this app that looks like a calculator that actually is a safe that you can put all the photos in. I'm like, very interesting, but things like
Yes.
that, I had no clue.
Yeah. And again, if you're not in that world, you're not going to know what those are. And those vault apps are a huge topic of conversations, because exactly, you can download one that looks like and functions like an
Yes.
actual calculator until you actually put in that secret code and it opens up. And unfortunately, vault apps are almost now ubiquitous in a lot of social media platforms. So Snapchat, they've got the My Eyes Only. That's a specific vault app within Snapchat. Even iOS now, photos, you have a hidden folder on your in your albums on iOS, and that's just baked into the software, and it's only accessible through Face ID now.
Wow. It's scary. Like it's getting, I say worse and worse, because it's just ways of people to be able to do things that can hurt and harm other people, right? So
Yeah, and a lot of that is, again, the awareness, not even knowing what, you don't know what you don't know. And when we talk to parents, we talk to students, obviously we don't talk to students' parents about the same things, but we make them aware of the reality of what truly is out there. And of course, what you can know to be armed with when you do have those conversations, to say, when we're talking about this thing, let's make sure we also include, like, hey, with your Snapchat, right, there's certain things that are in there, like the My Eyes Only, that we also, because that's a separate password too. Our CEO's daughter, way back when she first signed up for Snapchat, had to write a full essay as to why she should have Snapchat and needed it, and
I
all of
love
that.
it.
Yeah, some really interesting techniques out there for parents.
Yeah. Well, and my son, he's chosen not to have social media. He said, I've watched my friends come over and we're here to hang, and they're all on their phones. And so the kids know when they come here, if I come downstairs, it's so funny because you see phones going underneath their legs, because it's like, well, you guys are
Right.
here to hang, right? Like, okay.
Yeah. Hanging is not being in the same room on your phone,
Yeah, exactly.
but for some it is.
Well, we go to restaurants. What do we see couples doing? They're both on their phone. I'm like, I laughed one day. I said, I wonder if they're texting each other. You know,
Right.
they're both on their phones taking pictures of their food. So if our kids see us doing it, well then, why can't they do it? And I think that's where it's really important as parents to, to show them, hey, maybe on Sunday or say Friday night, let's have a no phone, no screen time. Let's play a game, let's read, go for a walk, whatever it is. But if we as parents and adults don't show them and don't do it, well, then how can we get mad at them?
Yep. Yep. We got to model that behavior 100%. And, I say this in some of my trainings. My first exposure to texting and driving was my dad, because that was when we had the flip phones and he was doing the T9 texting and all that, which honestly, I wish we could go back to that era. I do miss the old flip phone, the dumb phones.
Yep.
Yeah, no, it's exactly that. It's that modeling that behavior. And this is a really interesting paradigm shift that I've personally seen and noticed, especially on my own social media feeds and things like that, because way back when social media was first coming out and everything there, all of our parents were saying, don't believe everything you see, don't, engage. None of it's true, all of that. I almost think right now there is almost a reversal going on where we're having to have the conversation with our parents to say, no, Dad, that's an AI generated Facebook
Yes.
post. Like that's not real. And again, that's just from what technologies and tools are out there that are made to deceive.
Yeah. Well, and even the phone calls now because of AI, where somebody can sound like your son or your grandson saying, I'm in jail, I need money, I need whatever. And
Yes.
stuff is, again, it's all being utilized in such awful negative ways, but we're not always seeing, and that's the thing, we're not always seeing the positive. And there are positive things with it.
Oh yeah.
It's just too bad that the negative have, kind of taken over, especially with our youth.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and we do focus a lot on the negative because that's what makes the news headlines, that what makes
Yeah.
the articles and all these things. But the purpose still is to share your thoughts and feelings and your behaviors online. And if that's done in a healthy, mature way, I mean, it is a double-edged sword, because you can't have a business, you can't have any sort of impact unless you do have a social media account. Right now is the thing.
It sucks. I wish it was more organic. I wish that, it was like go to your local coffee shop and look on the clipboard,
Right.
see what's up there. That's the one thing I struggle with because, as a cop, I was not on social media.
Mm-hmm.
And, because the only stuff that was seen was usually negative or whatever. And so I'm like, I just want to kind of go away from stuff. And now having a business and with a book and doing the stuff that I do, I'll be honest, I hate social media.
Yep.
It consumes me. I get sometimes down these rabbit holes, and then I'm like, oh, I gotta just put it away. And I wish that I didn't need to actually fully have to be on it and
Mm-hmm.
getting content and all that kind of stuff. So for me, it's kind of a catch 22 as
It's a
well.
necessary evil at
It
times.
is, yes.
And I'm very glad I'm not part of our marketing team that does all the things, because it really is. Yeah, it really is that. And again, that's all part of the conversations that need to be had. And for those who choose to not have social media, which I'm very jealous of, there's so much good that can come from putting the phone down for a little bit and actually connecting with the outside world, because that's where we go back to some of these negative communities. That's where a lot of these kind of feedback loops happen. And if there isn't that interruption, a part of that pathway, then these feelings, these thoughts that some of our youth have begin to manifest, or show up as leakage and concerning behaviors. That's where we see these sudden outbursts in classrooms and in homes, and everybody's thinking, why is this happening? Like, what's they were a good kid with no history, nothing ever happened. But we talk with others and we look at the social media footprint, and there's a clear pathway of that shifting in behavior. And it's a again, it just goes back to, we just don't know what we don't know. Hence why we try to focus a lot of those conversations on what it is that youth may be filling themselves up with.
Yeah. Well, and that was one of the big things with the book too, is so that parents can actually get into the raw and the real, right? Because again, if you're not going to talk about certain stuff, okay, but now you are actually, that can cause more harm by not talking about it,
Hmm.
and just seeing what actually goes on in the schools and actually what kids are talking about and doing, and all of that kind of stuff. It's so important to just be a part of some, and whatever that looks like, because of course every parent is different with their kids in the social media, but to really just take an interest in it, even if you hate it, like I know for myself, but take an interest so that even if it means sitting down with your kid again in their safe space, which could be all the phone stuff, and
Hmm.
saying, hey, can you teach me or can you show me, maybe some of the posts your friends are doing? But again, very non judgmentally, sitting down, not going to right away saying, oh, what is she wearing? I can't believe that's even on there, because that's
Right.
where we're going to go. But to actually just have a open dialogue with them. So
Yeah.
then they feel like they're seen and heard and valued, and that even that now you're treating them like an adult, right?
Yeah, absolutely. My soft spot is always going to be for the video games. I have a firm stance that there is a video game out there for every single person that they would enjoy playing. Um, but it just, that depends on, getting into that. And again, the kids are smart. Kids will know. They have way more knowledge again about these things than we would. But I love that example of being able to just share that connection and start that with just meeting them where they're at. And obviously those conversations are a little bit different when we look at boys and girls. And obviously these things have happened with, some of these things, video games. Again, it's not to say that there isn't the screen addiction and things like that with some of our young females, but obviously, that's been your bread and butter, kind of growing up in that male dominated world. And how does that experience translate when you are working with young women?
Well, I think it's been amazing how many girls are gamers, which it blew me away
Hmm.
early on. Um, but I think when we look at stuff, I mean, the biggest thing that I really noticed was, when they started getting how many likes, and their self-esteem started going, and their confidence was based on, how many likes one of their videos got, or so and so got this and I didn't get this. Or, with uh, many of the photos, okay, not all of them, but many are, redone. It's not who they
Yeah.
really are. And so all of a sudden, as a young girl, you're looking at this going, oh, she's my age. How come she looks like this? Or how come she's this? Well, everything's filtered now. So
Yeah.
then all of a sudden you've got these girls, again, we're looking at, the eating disorders, even with the plastic surgery, all of
Yeah.
that kind of stuff, but that's what they're basing themselves on. So now or even the photos. Well, he said he loved me and he's not going to show it to anybody, you know? So then they send that one photo. Well, that one photo then goes to the entire hockey team. And then now all
Yeah.
of a sudden, not only do we have the victim over here, but now we've got trafficking of child porn, right? Which you don't think of that because it's a picture of, say, the girl you're dating or whatever. But as long as it's under 18 and they're not clothed, you've got,
Yeah.
it's considered child porn, right? So there's so much behind, and again, so much of it comes from the household, and getting that foundation with your kids, and especially young girls with their dads. You know, having your dad take you on a date. What does that look like?
Hmm.
Right? That just to show that, you know, what unconditional love looks like, a healthy relationship, that stuff. And if that's not in the home, well, then where do they know what that is and where are they going to get
Yeah.
it?
And I think that brings up another topic of conversation where, you talked earlier about kind of shifting that paradigm and things that need to change. I know right now a lot of our young boys who are being exposed to that type of content, which doesn't really promote healthy relationships. And it
Yes.
gets into their minds of this is actually what a healthy relationship should look like, that includes some not so great behaviors.
It's, oh, yeah. And, you know, and it's so easy to access porn now. Remember years and years where it took 10 minutes to load up, one file or one photo.
Mm-hmm.
And now it just comes on. You could be sitting next to somebody on a bus or on transit, and they're watching a porn and they're getting all of that in. And research has shown how the blueprint of the brain changes with porn and over time, and how um, and so when you've got a young 10, 11, 12, 13 year old continuously watching that, and that's all they see, well, how do they know how to treat a
Mm-hmm.
girl? How do they know how to treat a girl? They don't. And it's embarrassing for them because they don't want to tell people that that's what they're watching, because there's that shame behind it. So then all of a sudden, what's the next? Like it again, that's why they call it an addiction, because you need the next fix,
Yeah.
right? And with porn addiction, they're watching it start in our young males, and I mean, it's females too, but we're talking with males at younger and younger ages now.
Yeah, it's that exposure, and then it's also even some of these content creators that are suggesting to them this is what you should do, and
Mhm.
it's tough because sometimes, again, you're going to find a group of individuals online who are going to
It's your
experience
community.
those same ways and latch onto that. And a vulnerable young person may latch onto one idea, but that whole ethos that they have, these groups that they may have, is now they may be thinking, oh well, if this is true, what I'm feeling, then all these other things must be true, and engage in some of those other concerning behaviors. And the unfortunate part for young men and young boys right now is that those, you hear the toxic masculinity groups, right? Those right now are kind of the only groups that will meet these kids where they're at,
Yeah.
which is unfortunate, right? They'll have these conversations that say, yeah, guess what? Your life does suck because you don't have this, this, this. I have the tools. I've got the strategies. I can show you what to do. And, it all comes down to somebody's trying to sell you something, unfortunately. And what idea is that?
Well, and again, it goes right back to that connection and engagement, right? It's that community. They feel like they're part of a family, and that family knows how to manipulate them into believing what they want them to believe. And one of the things that you bring up with the masculinity, I think the Me Too movement, when it came in,
Mm,
I think it really harmed our young men, and because I just from watching and being a mom of a boy, kind of that demasculation of, well, I can open my own, car door or my own door. And it's like, well, I know you can, but I just want to do this because I'm respecting you. Right. And so that kind of flipped around. And so now our poor boys, trying to get them into being men, what does that look like? Again, healthy relationships, all that kind of stuff. It's like we have to retrain, talk to them about it. And I think that kind of put a little, I'll call it stab wound in that whole part of the masculinity.
yeah.
And so now when they see these, you're either all full, the full masculinity, or you're not. Well, no, it's not that. There's a middle ground, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
we're losing that everywhere, right? This middle
Yeah.
ground.
Yeah, exactly. And it really kind of went to that black and white thinking where, that movement, the Me Too movement, obviously extremely important for women to be able to believe in, the horrible things that they've experienced. But then also, you're right, on that flip side, then that became almost for young men and boys, well, I don't want to do the wrong thing.
Exactly.
But what is the wrong thing? What
Yeah.
was that? There wasn't that conversation necessarily for them. And then you've got the flip side of the extreme masculinity of, forget that movement, forget all these things. Like,
You know the
this
man
is how you need,
here.
yeah,
Yeah.
this is how you need to behave. This is when what should happen from there. So
Yeah.
again, I feel for some of those individuals who are confused on what they need to believe and have. And again, where we come in is to be able to intercept in some of those ideas and understand that, you know, while some of these ideas, whether again we're talking on both sides of the thing here, we may align with, that doesn't necessarily mean that everything else that they say is true. There is the middle area. You're entitled to your feelings and your opinions that you're going to have, But then let's explore those.
Yeah, I totally agree. And again, it comes down to connecting conversation, right? And
Yeah.
many people don't want to have that,
Yeah.
or they don't know how.
Yeah. Well, hopefully with the youth truth and with the calm leadership method, those are some things that are available out there. So Carlamay, before we get out of here, I guess just one overarching question for any parent, youth, staff member, anybody who's listening right now, what would be really the one takeaway you want them to walk away with all of your experience, the thousands of conversations and talks you've had? What's one thing you want them to walk away with here?
Well, youth want to be seen, heard, and valued, just like adults do. And when we look at that, the biggest thing is each of us has a diamond inside of us. And our diamond's either been tarnished, it's still in the rough, wherever it is, but all it takes is one person to change that, to start polishing off this diamond that can shine in ways that ourselves may not even know. So be that one person to that youth, because you never know, by asking them a question or just by saying hi or I see you, can change that whole trajectory of that kid's life.
Absolutely, 100%. So if people want to contact you, Carlamay, where can they find you?
So I'm at www.carlamaysheremata.com, and email is carlamay@carlamaysheremata.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. This was fantastic. I hope we get to chat again and maybe in person for some of those next ones.
Awesome. Thanks. Have a great day.